once again for the BamaOnLine Podcast. This one on a Friday, July the 28th, 2023. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BamaOnline.com, this time alongside senior team writer Charlie Potter. And what do you know, Charlie? One of the last weekends that we'll have without football of some kind, I guess, whether it's practice, whether it's camp, whether it's the onset of games in the next month or so. We got football. How do you feel about that?
It's crazy. It doesn't seem like it's really here, but I mean, hell, we're less than a week away from preseason games for
Yeah.
the NFL. That's exciting. But yeah, football practice will be here less than a week, and we'll hear from Nick Saban. We'll hear from the coordinators. We'll actually get to go to one practice. Everybody will get to go to it, but that's exciting. So I feel like I'm conflicted because I feel like it was a very long summer, but at the same time, I don't realize that it's actually less than a week away yet still. So it's kind of best of both worlds.
Yeah, once it's here, it really hits you and slaps you in the face almost. I went out
Yeah.
to Jaguars camp yesterday to check out our Jacksonville Jaguars. Check out some Calvin Ridley, fresh from the Atlanta Falcons after that year off, courtesy of the NFL. Cam Robinson, speaking of suspensions, looking at a 4-gamer to open the 2023 campaign. But that's when it hit me sitting there watching practice yesterday. I was like, geez, it's here. And as you said, NFL preseason just right around the corner. Now, you're fresh from Nashville and the SEC media days. Give us a little bit of a insight into the event being held in the Music City. We're both very much on record as being proponents of Hoover. I think we're coming to grips with the fact that this is going to sort of be a carnival of sorts moving forward, going from town to town. Dallas up next. But what did you think about Nashville as a first timer with the SEC Media Days?
I thought it was pretty good. The setup, at least, was very similar to Hoover. It was all in one space. You just go through the entrance of the hotel, go up the escalator, and boom, you're there. I like that it's all kind of, you don't have to go very far to go to different interviews and stuff like that. That was my biggest gripe with Atlanta. Not to just dump on Atlanta here, but the fact that they had it in two different buildings and you had to ping pong between the two if you wanted to get multiple interviews with Nick Saban was annoying. And so I think Nashville did a good job. The weather didn't permit. I know the SEC had some stuff they wanted to do, like a concert that got rained out and things like that. But I think Nashville would be a good second option if they choose to never go back to Hoover. Now, next year is going to be a lot with Dallas. Next year's travel budget. Sorry, Tim, but it's going to be wild with Dallas for SEC Media Days. You've got Norman, Oklahoma, Madison, Wisconsin. It'll be a lot, but yeah, I wish they would keep it in Hoover because it is so convenient and it's centrally located. But for me, if it were to stay in Nashville, I wouldn't have that big of a problem with that.
You know, with Oklahoma and Texas now coming in and A&M already in the league, it kind of feels like there's going to be more of a push to go west with some of this stuff, specifically to the state of Texas, like SEC Media Days next year. We heard some rumblings at the end of the baseball season about, hey, how about one of the Texas venues, even for the SEC baseball tournament at some point down the road. But when it comes to Nashville and the central nature of it, and then the facilities that are in place with men's basketball, that should be the permanent home for the SEC
Absolutely.
men's basketball tournament. I can see it as a rotational part of the SEC Media Days. And they're going to build this new football stadium too up in Nashville. Now, I don't know how that's going to work weather-wise. There's a reason why I think the SEC obviously likes the football championship game indoors in early December after a couple of games in some rough weather in Birmingham back in the early 1990s. But Nashville, on just about every front, is a viable option. I guess maybe not softball because Vanderbilt doesn't play college softball, but otherwise, being a place to be for a lot of people right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Nashville's not a town that Alicia and I frequent because we're not big country music fans. But there's a lot to offer. I have friends that live there. It makes a lot of sense, and heck, it's the home of On Three. Got to see a
Should
lot
be
of
enough, right?
familiar
That should be
faces.
enough.
Yeah, I'm sure Shannon Terry has enough pull that SEC media days he can get them to go there more frequently. But no, I mean, I went in. I don't know if I had expectations or just had the thought of Atlanta in my mind and had that sense of dread. But I came away thinking like, okay, that was pretty good. And you're right, though. It'll be interesting to see what happens from a SEC championship standpoint because I think it makes perfect sense in Atlanta. Heck, I miss the Georgia Dome and the
I do
field that
too.
place.
That place rocked. Yeah.
Mercedes Benz is a great stadium. Don't get me wrong, but the Georgia Dome was so easy from a media standpoint. But yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense for Nashville because of it being a big city. A lot of fans there. You have the SEC team in town, even though I don't know how many Vanderbilt football fans there are. But I'll be interested to see, what they do next because Texas, you're right, it felt like that was coming. Heck, I know, there's people that go to these media events for the entire week and they go hard at night. Um, God forbid they put this thing in New Orleans, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Absolutely. And as a part of SEC Media Days, we'll get into some defensive talk coming up a little bit later, too, maybe a little hoops as we wrap up. But as a part of SEC Media Days on an annual basis, you had the media vote where it comes to the divisional predictions and then the overall pick in the SEC for the upcoming season. What I wanted to get into, though, more today was Alabama's presence on the all SEC teams, 3 teams, first, second, and third team selections. Alabama checked all those boxes. And when the ballots, were counted, Charlie, J.C. Latham, Dallas Turner, Kool-Aid McKinstry twice, actually, as a defensive player and as a return specialist. You had Nealon Hibbett, Will Reichard, all those guys, first team selections. Second teamers, Jace McClellan, Tyler Booker, Ja'Cory Brooks, Seth McLaughlin, Malachi Moore, Jaheim Otis, and Justin Aboigbe. And then for your third teamers, Jermaine Burton, Tim Smith, and Chris Braswell. My ballot, I had most of those guys. I did omit McClellan as a top 4 option at running back. Jermaine Burton wasn't among my wide receivers. Same for Tim Smith at defensive line and Chris Braswell. Guys who did make the first, second, or third teams that I didn't have. Or who didn't make one of those 3 teams who I did have on my ballot, Darian Dalcourt, Deontay Lawson. So do you want to disclose maybe how you went with some of those picks, maybe some surprises for you, some guys that made it that maybe you weren't thinking would make it, and maybe a guy or two that I outlined or you had that should have made it in your opinion?
I think you and I are kind of aligned in the way that we were thinking. I didn't have Jermaine Burton or really the third teamers. I don't think I had on my ballot, but I did have Deontay Lawson because I think he's in for a big year. Alabama needs him to have a big year. And I have to go back and look. I think I had maybe Jace as number 4, but it was sitting in the back of my mind just how deep Alabama's running back room is. And it's kind of tough just to pick one guy, even though I think now another year removed from that ACL injury, that Jace could have a big year. But I thought for the most part, Alabama's first and second teamers made a lot of sense. I was kind of surprised to see Nealon Hibbett on the first team line, but I think this was the first time we got to vote for long snappers, and I think a lot of media guys, and I'm lumping myself in that group, don't watch a lot of long snapper film, and the way that the ballot's constructed is listed in alphabetical order by school. So Alabama's the first one. I think people just probably pick maybe the first 2 or the name they like the most. And that's no knock really on Nealon. It's really a knock on the voting process, and that could be a completely different discussion when you look at the guys that voted for Vandy to win the SEC. But yeah, I think for the most part, when looking at these guys and how they fell in the team, at least the first and second team, I don't really have any gripes just about the way that I voted.
Yeah,
I will say this. My one thing is I would have had Tyler Booker on the first line at guard.
Yeah, I had Tyler as a first teamer. I had J.C. Latham as a first teamer, obviously, along the offensive line. Tyler Booker as a first teamer. I had Darian Dalcourt as a second teamer. I know that's high based on a lot of other lists. I had Seth McLaughlin as my second team center. So yeah, I do think we lined up in a lot of ways, probably on these selections. But as for Nealon Hibbett, Still got thoughts of that Arkansas game in my mind from last year, and maybe it wasn't even Nealon's fault. I still haven't figured out what the hell happened on that botch punt, right? With Burnup and how that played out in Fayetteville, but he did have the fumble recovery. Nealon did against Auburn in the Iron Bowl, so we got to give him some love for that. You're right, though. I think it's true with just about any position, though. It's tough if you cover a specific team, because the reality is, how much of these other guys have you really seen unless they play the team you cover? So especially with an emphasis on the East, I almost, if it comes down to picking between a guy, let's say picking an offensive lineman from Georgia or an offensive lineman from Kentucky, you kind of know which way I'm going to go. I mean, I'm going to probably go with Georgia's offensive lineman after this last couple of 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the way a lot of people view it. I mean, there's obviously, you can't sit here as someone that covers a single team and know every player in the conference. There's some obvious choices. Like I doubt anybody that voted didn't have Brock Bowers as their first team tight end. You could probably guess who a lot of people had on their quarterback ballot, even though there's probably some discussion there. Running back makes a lot of sense. But then, I look at the way the wide receivers were voted. I didn't have Ladd McConkey on my ballot at all, and he's a first-team wide receiver.
I didn't either.
I think that's what the point that you're trying to make is, that when in doubt, pick Alabama or Georgia. And again, I think that's a flawed system, because we have so many people voting and probably so many people that don't watch games. But when in doubt, Alabama or Georgia players are pretty damn good, and so put them on the line, I think.
Absolutely. And, there's a lot of star power at a position like wide receiver that has to be replaced within the league. Jalen Hyatt, for an example, at Tennessee, one of those guys. So I think that's where it probably benefited a guy like Ja'Cory even. If I wasn't sure about that group, I've seen enough of Ja'Cory at this point over the last 2 seasons to think, yeah, he could have that kind of year in 2023. Same for Jermaine. I actually would have thought in retrospect that, based on the knowledge of the folks who had ballots in this thing, Jermaine might have been the second teamer over Ja'Cory. I guess it's kind of splitting hairs at that point, but those are the kind of positions where things were more up for grabs. I think the defensive line was similar. I thought it was great to see Justin Aboigbe as a second teamer, but this is a guy who missed 8, 9 games last season and coming off a very serious injury. But it speaks to the expectations, I think, for Alabama's defensive line, which we'll get into more coming up here in just a little bit, that they have a core group that is going to be expected to play all 3 of those guys at this at least fringe all conference level.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the defensive line for this season is extremely important, and all 3 guys that are at the top of that pecking order made the team. And so I think that your typical fan probably didn't hear a lot about Tim Smith, but I think those are Alabama's only 3 options on the team. To make it clear for people that obviously don't see the ballot, you can't just go and pick, like, Caleb Downs wasn't on the ballot. You can't just go and pick anybody to put in there. Alabama will list, yeah, Alabama will list players and you choose from it, and that's the same for every team. But at the same time, though, I think the fact that all 3 were listed, it does lean toward they play for Alabama, they must be good. But Alabama's defensive line, it hasn't been discussed quite enough, because you have all the quarterback and the offensive line and just the general talk about Alabama. But for me, the way that unit plays this fall will determine a lot of the success of this entire defense, because it'll free things up for the inside backers. If they're able to get interior pressure, that's going to help out the back end. So they need, 1 or more of these guys to be that war daddy they've been missing. And I think all 3 have the potential to be an all SEC candidate at the end of the season. I think Jaheim Otis kind of has the highest of the ceiling, because he continues to transform his body. But I think if they can have these guys play at this level post preseason, then this defense will be in pretty good shape.
Defensive line in the league, another area where some significant star power has moved on, starting with Jalen Carter, the outstanding defensive lineman for the Georgia Bulldogs, now of the Philadelphia Eagles. So another area where you're going to expect some guys from Alabama to get the nod if things are close. And I think you said it for this defense, and we're going to get into that now. But what we're going to do as far as the defensive talk on this edition of the Bama Online Podcast, kind of just outline, give you an idea how things could change really from package to package. And I talked about going out to Jaguars camp on Thursday, and the first snap of team period and just about every snap thereafter, Charlie, the Jaguars defense was in the nickel package. Now, a lot of that has to do with the Jags now with Ridley to go along with Zay Jones and Christian Kirk, and then even Evan Ingram is a versatile tight end. I mean, that's a team that opponents are going to have to play a lot of nickel against. And that's just going to be their base, how they roll. But even at the college level, as we've seen in recent years, nickel defense is essentially the base defense in 2023. And so, you again start with those guys up front, and you talk about the front seven and kind of how it all relates to Alabama for the upcoming season. I think we have an idea of who some of the prime candidates are going to be when thinking about going from package to package. And that way, for me anyway, I think about Tim Smith. I think about Jaheim Otis. I think about Justin Aboigbe, Deontay Lawson, Dallas Turner, Chris Braswell, Kool-Aid McKinstry, maybe Terrion Arnold, Malachi Moore. Those are the guys that come to mind for me as we sit here on the verge of fall camp. But given the way things can shift again from package to package, I think there are still quite a few X factor guys for this defense. A starter in the base and or the big nickel may not be a guy who's out there when Alabama goes to the dime rabbits, or if the cheetah is still around this season. But starting with the nickel, Charlie, because it is the package that UA is in most of the time these days, there's some interesting possibilities to consider. We just talked about Aboigbe and Tim Smith and Jaheim Otis, Turner, Braswell at the outside linebacker positions. You're going to have the 2 inside linebackers in that nickel. You're going to have the 5 defensive backs. So that's really 12 guys for 11 spots right there. And again, up front where we'll start, I think those big 3 that we've outlined already on the podcast are great bets to be starters in the base and in the big nickel. But, when they go to more of a pass rush look, Charlie, in their nickel package, does Otis stay out there? Is it Smith and Aboigbe out there? Do you have a specialist type up front that you're considering right now that could impact that situation? Again, the moving pieces starting with that defensive line.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens up front, because when thinking about this, my mind kind of automatically went to a guy like Jamil Burroughs, who's no longer on the team. He was someone that a lot of people, especially the players that talked to us, have been really high on from a pass rush standpoint. And I think that's a guy that could have thrived in the just your nickel and your dime looks. But I think Otis, with the way he's continued to just drop weight and look like a healthy playing weight, can play in the nickel. I think Aboigbe and Tim Smith make a lot of sense, though. And then for me, I think a guy that we'll see in some of those sub packages a lot is a guy like Jamarian Latham. We saw him as the lone defensive lineman in Alabama's dime defense when they would do the Rabbits, when they would throw the Rabbits package out there. I think he can do that in the nickel too. So I think they have options. I think Aboigbe and Smith make a ton of sense there, but I wouldn't be surprised to see, Jamarian Latham, maybe some of those young guys like a Damon Payne, or maybe we see a Monkel Goodwine or somebody else get opportunity. Maybe James Smith, if he continues to make progress. I think he's a guy that now with Burroughs gone could definitely benefit from those open reps. So Alabama has options, but those guys that are at the top of the pecking order make the most sense. It's just then you get to those rotational spots, and we'll see how some of those guys develop.
Yeah, I think the dime nose tackle option will be interesting because the smart money would seem to be on Aboigbe, Smith. You mentioned Jamarian Latham. That could certainly factor into that as well. But there is still opportunities there for other guys that you outlined, especially with Burroughs no longer being a part of this Alabama program. So those X factors that could extend into a true freshman or a guy that's developing. I thought Monkel Goodwine in the 8A game, watching that one multiple times over, I thought he showed you some potential. Is it right now? Is he already to that point? Well, I think he's going to get an opportunity, at least in fall camp, to show that, I may not be your first option, maybe not even your second, but if you want to stay fresh, you can put me out there in some pass rush situations and I can help in that regard. Now, outside linebacker, as we know, how it goes from base to nickel, to the dime package, and how guys like Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell, who can both be incorporated into this defense. This is a defense in recent years. They've liked to play those two outside linebackers together, even in the nickel on early downs, when you would typically see one of them out there with a defensive end on the other side and a couple of guys inside. Anthony Jennings, Terrell Lewis come to mind a few years back. And then here most recently with Dallas and Will Anderson. So, I saw on the roster, I think Chris Braswell, is he listed at 255 pounds right now? I mean, if that's true, that's a big number for a guy who showed up at Alabama in 2020, desperately in need of bulk and muscle.
That was the point that I was going to make, because he and Jihad Campbell were on a podcast recently. I think it was Football Bill. I want to make sure we give them proper credit, but and he just looked bigger. So
Yeah.
the thing that I was going to mention is you have Will Anderson on the field, but Will obviously came in as a guy that can make an immediate impact, got on the field. He added mass over the course of his career, and Dallas is no small dude by any stretch of the imagination. So I think when you have dynamic players like that, you want to have them on the field as much as possible. That cuts into some of your defensive line time. But I think now with Chris Braswell as the projected starter opposite Turner, and just seeing the tree trunks of legs that he has and the mass that he seems to put on his frame, he can withstand some of that. And that's one of the big questions about these outside backers. I think from a standpoint of a pass rush, they can do that. I think we saw that from Chris Braswell. You expect that from some of these outside linebackers because they come in as former 5 stars. Some of them come in a little lean and they add to that, but they can get after the passer, no doubt. But how can they perform in run support? And I think with Braswell, continuing to develop his body over the course of his career and to learn the defense and to be more comfortable in a player that the coaches trust first and foremost, I think he can be on the field in some of these, nickel situations and early down situations. So, yeah, I think that's certainly possible. I think that's a good thing to have. You don't want to have to employ it all the time because, like we've been alluding to, in early down situations, you're looking to stop the run first and foremost. And maybe you want a bigger body out there. But I think with the way that Braswell has just grown, I think he can certainly play that part if needed.
And a lot of fans are going to want to see Keon Keeley, the 5-star freshman summer enrollee, Yanzi Pierre, similarly to that at the edge. But don't sleep on guys like Q Robinson and Keanu Coot, Jeremiah Alexander. You got a young, talented guy that was there in the spring, and Quay Rusall that could factor into things. So still a lot of depth, a lot of quality there, but certainly it starts with Braswell and Turner at the top of that depth chart, and how they go about utilizing those two guys together will be fascinating. Once again, the inside linebacker competition as it goes from package to package. We talked about expectations for Lawson. I think first and foremost, can he have a healthy run through the 2023 season, because he's had some bumps from a health perspective in his first couple of seasons. And, here's the thing about Nick Saban. We'll talk about this with the secondary too. And I've said it before. Nick Saban isn't I hope our guys are ready, or, we think they'll be ready. If there's any question, Nick goes to the transfer portal and gets Trez Marshall. He goes to the junior college ranks and gets Justin Jefferson. Again, very well might be Deontay. That's the every down guy. But Saban's never going to find himself in a position of being unpleasantly surprised. As he said many times before, he doesn't like surprises of any kind. So I guess it starts with Deontay, Charlie, and then Jihad Campbell, obviously just a really promising young player to go along with those new additions we talked about.
Yeah, I think Deontay is a guy that can be an every down player, and they need him to be, because he has some explosiveness about him. He spent last season just really learning from Henry Toa. I know that name brings up some chills for Alabama fans, but if there's one thing that Henry can hang his hat on, is his knowledge of the defense and be able to get everybody lined up. So if Deontay can use his athleticism and then continue to grow as kind of the quarterback of the defense, the general, then I think the defense will be in good hands. And I do think they need some more aggression at that position. Just some real dudes, and I think Deontay Lawson can be that. But I think opposite him is the most interesting on the defensive side of the ball, because overall they just need better play at that position. They need more negative plays and they need more consistency. And you're right. I mean, Nick Saban went out and got a guy in Tresman Marshall who, consistency isn't necessarily a word you latch on to him just because he hasn't been available with injuries. And, hopefully this fresh start, he'll be able to stay on the field. But you mentioned him, a guy like Jahad Campbell is going to be tough to keep off of it. And if those are indeed the top two players, I could see sort of that platoon we've seen in the past with guys like Reggie Ragland and then Sean Dion Hamilton and Reuben Foster. It would make a lot of sense if, in your nickel package on third down or in just in dime alone, that a guy like Jahad Campbell's on the field, because he's someone that can, I think, excel in coverage. He's a rangy linebacker that has that explosive ability, and not quite as much as Braswell, but again, he was in that same podcast, and you can tell he's added mass to his frame as well. So I think those are your top two candidates there. I'm kind of interested to see what else happens if maybe they give some other guys a look, because Justin Jefferson is just a missile at the inside linebacker position. I think Sean Murphy is someone that they like a lot, and got some opportunities with the ones in the spring with Lawson out. So they have options. A lot of it's unproven, but I think that if those guys can learn the defense, then the inside linebacker position can get a little bit of a boost from last year. And then from there, it's just, how do we kind of, implement these guys into our, base nickel and dime packages. And again, I think they can maybe, go an old school route and use sort of that platoon method.
Yeah, all credit to Henry. As far as a showrunner at the inside linebacker position, he was excellent. But they do need more of a physical presence in the middle of the field. They just do. And I know it's tough in this era of football because the way teams spread you out, throw it around, you got to be able to play in coverage exceptionally well. I actually think that's an area where Lawson, where Campbell, that will be an upgrade, I think, over the last year or so. Last year, Alabama inside linebackers didn't have an interception in 2022. So I think that'll be an upgrade, but definitely Jefferson does have that type of potential. He's a guy that you have to account for when he is absolutely on the football field. Let's talk about the secondary before we get out of here, Charlie. And again, moving pieces, competitions, Kool-Aid, a certainty at one corner. I'm going to guess Caleb Downs, since he's in what I thought to be anyway a fall camp hype video. I'm going to guess Caleb Downs is a true freshman is what we think he is. Malachi Moore, veteran who can help you in multiple spots. But Arnold at that one corner. Trey Amos comes in from Louisiana. You got some nice young players there, but obviously looking to bridge the gap a little bit with some of the transfer portal additions, not only at corner, but at safety too.
Yeah, the secondary, for me, I think the position battle at inside linebacker is the most important, but the secondary is kind of the most up in the air, because I think they have at minimum 8 players that can play these 6 spots. And Kool-Aid is entrenched at corner. There's no knocking him out of that spot. He's going to be every down starter. He started all 13 games last year. Opposite him, though, Terrion Arnold makes a lot of sense. He started 7 games this past season. I think that he can maybe take a big step from learning the corner position and really getting his feet wet going into year 3 in the program. But then you bring in a guy like Trey Amos from the transfer portal, and you mentioned it earlier. Nick Saban, doesn't do that just for shits and giggles. There's a reason for it. I do think losing a couple of corners in the spring to the transfer portal certainly, led to that. You want to have depth, and to get a proven guy like that, you can't pass that up. But I think that position will be one that's fascinating to follow. But say Amos wins that cornerback position opposite of Kool-Aid, then Terrion could be a guy that you look at in the slot at star. I think Earl Little is the leader in the clubhouse there. I think he had a great spring, and it's really a shame he didn't get to play with the Winds because you had the transfers. They had to move some things around and move Malachi down the slot. But he's a guy that, well, I guess if he wasn't not with the twos, then he wouldn't have got that interception that a lot of people who are not over. So highlight play for him. But just from a cornerback room perspective, I think those four guys certainly make a lot of sense. I think they like some of the young guys too. Daniel Kite, Des Ricks, Will Hurley all showed some good things in the spring with the twos. But really what happens at corner is it's almost kind of like a revolving door between that other cornerback spot and the star position. And then you throw in some of these guys at safety. Caleb Downs can play star. I think Jalen Key can play star. Maybe a guy like Christian Story could get a look there as well. But there's a lot of options, and that's just as the corner before you even break down the safety position.
Yeah, I think with Amos and Key, they are they're the wild cards because I look at both of them. I look at Amos as more of just a pure corner. And I think Key does have sub role attributes, but I think he is a safety first and foremost. But what they both give you is flexibility with all those guys that you outlined, like Arnold, like Malachi Moore, like Downs. They give you flexibility throughout your packages on the defensive side of the ball if it comes down to it. I think Trey Amos in man coverage, the minute he walked on campus outside of Kool-Aid, might be Alabama's best option at that position. So we'll see how it goes. But Charlie, that's a wrap for the latest edition of the BamaOnLine Podcast. Always appreciate you joining us here on the show, my man.